So good morning, everyone. My PowerPoint presentation is entitled Traversing the Chronicles of Mahishasura Sculptures of Kerala. Before we dive deep into the understanding of sculptures of Mahishasura and Kerala, it is imperative that we understand what the concept of evil in India represented. So mythology can more or less be defined as the science of primitive man and his manner of explaining the universe. So hence, the myths have vital information embedded within itself, which is necessary in understanding the individual and the society in its traditional setting. So mythology is not just limited to gods and goodness, etc. There are evil. There is no good without evil. So there is evil in mythology. The unexplainable and unfavorable phenomena that were perceived beyond human control and understanding were categorized as evil. The evil, then devised into a form and depicted in sculptures, help us be cognizant of the perceptions and characteristics of evil and demons in the society. India, as in the case of India, India is true with innumerable number of demons. Each state, village, caste, community, tribe, everybody has its own myths and legends to account for the vast range of demons. And there are many evil beings prevalent in India, which include beings like Asuras, Rakshasas, Bhutas, Pretas, Pishajas, Atrins, Kanvas. We have seen all these demonic beings in the previous presentations, within which the Asuras and Rakshasas are the two major entities of evil in India. So let's examine them individually. First, Asura. In literature is a debated opinion even today. There exist varied opinions about the evolution and the development of the term Asura. Some of the scholars like Edward Wash Hale, Monia Williams, Rudolf Otto, etc., are of the opinion that the term Asura did not initially have a negative connotation, especially in the family books of the Rig Veda. But later, by the time of the composition of the Atharva Veda, the term took on a wide spectrum of meanings, such as the enemies who oppose all gods and anti-gods, etc. And later, by the time of the composition of the Brahmanas and the later Hindu literature, the term was exclusively used to indicate a class of beings who were opposed to God, and they were frequently associated with inauspicious and dark things. They were also shown as constantly being engaged in battle with the gods. It is also important to note that, especially in the Jaiminya Brahmana and the Aitreya Brahmana, the existence of or the usage of a compound word, Asura Rakshasa. So these transpositions and resemblance in characteristics demonstrate a tendency for the Asuras and Rakshasas, which are two separate entities, to be portrayed more like one another. Now, examining the features of Rakshasa, Rakshasa, unlike the Asura, was always considered as evil beings. They were portrayed as beings who were tricky, and they were always associated with diseases and were shown as in apposition of deceitful speech. Evil, accursed, repulsive, greedy, tricky, Maya possessing are some of the characteristic features of Rakshasas defined through literary sources. And Rakshasas are also given the ability to shapeshift, which they utilize to disrupt some sacrifices. So now moving on to our core demon that we are concentrating on this presentation, Mahishasura. Mahishasura, as we all know, it is a popular lore in mythology. He was a king of the Asuras who led the demons to a successful war against the Devas, even against the trinity of Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. And the depiction of Mahishasura or the Mahishasura story in iconographic art almost transcends geographical boundaries, and its influence can even be found outside the subcontinent of India. So now we'll just briefly skim through the story of Mahishasura. I know everyone present here is accustomed to hearing the story of the popular mythology of Mahishasura. The story of Mahishasura is found in described in a few literary texts such as the Devi Mahatmya part of the Markandeya Purana, the Devi Bhagavata, the Vamana Purana, and the Mahabharata. So the story goes on that there were two asuras, namely Rambha and Karambha, who decided to practice severe austerities in order to be blessed with a resplendent sun. So they started doing the severe penance in the middle of Panjagni, and Indra, as always, gets startled by their penance, and he disguises himself as a crocodile and drags Karambha down into the Panjagni and kills him. Devastated by the fate of his brother, the Asura brother Ramba decides to commit suicide. At this instance, Agni, or in some cases Brahma, appears before them and grants them a wish, which is that a sun who is resplendent and cannot be defeated by any gods or any man may be born to Ramba for the woman he likes. So Ramba goes away from there on his visit to a Malabat Yaksha. He sees a she buffalo and gets attracted to the she buffalo, and their copulation leads to them having a son who is our Mahishasura. So after that, he went back to Padala. Rambha went back to Padala, but his sexual union with the she buffalo was known of by the other asuras, and they banished them from the Padala, or the log of the world of the asuras. So they went back to the place of Malavati Yakshas. So once at the place of Malavati Yakshas, while the she buffalo was roaming around, another buffalo got attracted to the she buffalo and came behind her. So Rambha intervened between the she buffalo and the buffalo, and a battle ensued between Rambha and the buffalo, in which Rambha was killed and gored to death by the buffalo. So the she buffalo actually sought the refuge of the Yakshas, who cremated Rambha, and the she buffalo, she herself immolated on the pyre of Rambha. So from this pyre emerged a ferocious demon, a fearful demon, whose name was Raktabija, who later became the minister of the Mahishasura and played an important role in the Mahishasura Yuddha. And he drove out all the Yakshas from their kingdom and killed all the buffaloes except Mahishasura. So with his exemplary skills, then Mahishasura conquers the heaven and drives out Indra and the other Devas from heaven. And on the appeal of the Devas, Devi sprang from the collective power of gods and was tasked with the duty to annihilate Mahishasura. So afterwards, in the horrific Devasura battle that ensued, Mahishasura and his formidable army was annihilated by the goddess and her forces. So this is a brief overview of the story of Mahishasura. Now, understanding Mahishasura's cultures without looking at them from the point of Indian art view is almost criminal. So we need to first analyze the Mahishasura Mardini cult and the sculptures that have been found across the subcontinent and even outside. So the antiquity of Mahishasura Mardini sculptures is still debated, and there is no consensus among the scholars. So some of the scholars have an opinion that it has a pre-Kushan or a Kushan beginning, and some other scholars like Dr. Jayan Banerjee are the opinion that Mahishasura Mardini sculptures usually have a Gupta period of origin. Keeping that aside, the oldest depiction of Mahishasura that has been obtained is from the Mahishasura Mardini statue, which has been obtained from the site of Nagar in Rajasthan, and the site is dated to 1st century CE. So this is the sculpture that we are talking about. And now let us analyze the depiction of Mahishasura through various stages of period, how the depiction of Mahishasura has changed through various stages of period. So initially in the Kushan period or the pre-Kushan period, the depiction of Mahishasura Mardini was in an embryonic stage. So the iconography was sort of developing. And you can see Mahishasura is more or less depicted in a zoomorphic form. It is as if Mahishasura or the buffalo was stopped in the middle of a charge, as if he was charging towards someone, and he was stopped in between. So the goddess is shown here holding up the muscle of the Mahishasura, and his body is in a almost like a diagonal shape. But by the time of the Gupta period, the iconography of Mahishasura was popularized in temple iconography, and you can see there is a difference here. So Mahishasura is depicted in an upside down manner, and he is shown with his head beneath the feet of the goddess. And he is also shown as being punctured by the trident of the goddess. So another interesting fact is that the currently popular image of Mahishasura, who is being killed after he comes out of a decapitated buffalo, which we'll look into the images in a few moments time, that actually arose during the Gupta stage. And another interesting fact is the South Indian sculptures or the Chola sculptures, which is a totally different strain of representation on its own, because it only has Mahishasura depicted as a severed head. We'll look into that in a few slides, in the coming slides. So the Mahishasura is depicted only as a severed head, and Devi is shown, and now the goddess is shown standing on top of the severed head of Mahishasura. So this points out to the possible influence of Tamil myths or legends or Sthala Mahatmyas, such as the Arunachala Purana, etc. So these are a few images, and you can see here what I was talking about in the previous slide, how the depiction of Mahishasura has changed and evolved throughout the different periods, how he is depicted as an zoomorphic form, in a fully zoomorphic form, in a zoanthropomorphic form, etc. Now moving on, now we can try and understand how Mahishasura has been gleaned or understood through the sculptures of Kerala. So in the sculptures of Kerala, there are two different types of depictions in which Mahishasura is present. Either Mahishasura is depicted as part of the Mahishasura Mardini singular panel illustration, or he is depicted as part of the narrative illustration of the battle between Mahishasura and Devi. We have undertaken a vast and comprehensive survey of the temples of Kerala and photo documented many of the sculptures, of which almost 20 sculptures related to Mahishasura have been found. And quite an interesting fact is that almost every sculpture we have documented of Mahishasura has been executed in wood. And these sculptures are usually found on the architraves and friezes of the Balikalpura, Vadil Madam, Namaskara Mandapa, or the ceilings of Gobras, etc. Also, some wooden panels around the walls of the Srikovil and some bracket figures that are associated with the Srikovil depict Mahishasura figures. Moving on, we'll now look at how singular panels have depicted Mahishasura. Within the singular panels, there are two different types of depiction of Mahishasura. One, he is shown in a zoanthropomorphic form, wherein he has the head of a buffalo and the body of a man. And the second one, this was the one I was talking about, he is shown only as a severed head. So other features of Mahishasura is not visible here. He is just shown as a severed head on top of which Devi stands. So in these figures, you can see Mahishasura is depicted with an assortment of ornaments and attributes. He is shown with a laterally expanded Kiridamaguda. He has a variety of ornaments and embellishments like the Kanganas, Keivuras, Bujavalayams. He holds a Khadga and a Kedaga in his hands. A Griva, a variety of Grivas, Haras, and Udarabandhas, and open Vanamala decorate his torso. You can even see on his lower body, his lower garment stretches towards his knees in multiple occasions. And these garments are decorated with a variety of sash, tassels, loops, and festoons. A kadibanda or a girdle runs across and holds these lower garments together. These heavy embellishments and finery seems to point out the fact that Mahishasura was portrayed as a king of the Asuras. His royal status is being ascertained in this depiction. These are a few other depictions of Mahishasura which has been found from different temples across Kerala. So you can see what we have just discussed, huge fineries and embellishments has been adorned to the Mahishasura, like the Kiridamaguda, the Kanganas, Keivuras, etc. are all depicted here. So as we were talking about, we can finally sum up that the depictions of Mahishasura in the singular panels of Kerala can be basically or broadly divided into two. Either he is depicted as being stood upon by the goddess, which is the one over here, or he is shown in a frontal or a profile view. And the one which I had, which I was talking about, or like the goddess is shown standing upon the severed head of Mahishasura. It is mentioned in Tamil mythology or Sthala Puranas that Mahishasura was indeed the one who gained benefit by his head being touched by the feet of Durga. So I think this is most probably the visualization of the Tamil mythology, in which Mahishasura is the one who benefits from him being killed by the goddess. So in the sculpture, as we talked earlier, in the sculpture, he is shown standing in frontal pose. He is depicted with a wide array of ornaments. And he is an interesting fact to note that he is also depicted as abnormally built and with a deformity. You can see having a buffalo head is a deformity. So having a deformity is sort of like a characteristic feature of the Rakshasas as well as the Asuras, because they have been depicted interchangeably. So if you take, for example, the case of Kabanda from Ramayana, a demon from Ramayana, he doesn't have a head. So that is a deformity. Or for example, another demon like Ravana who has multiple heads and multiple arms, we can classify them as a deformity. And I think that maybe the depiction of such deformities are a visualization of the characteristic feature of Rakshasa or an Asura. So now we come across the depiction of Mahishasura in the narrative sculptures of Kerala. So I think more or less these narrative sculptures have been influenced by the Devi Mahatmya and the Srimad Devi Bhagavata, which describes the war between the armies of Mahishasura and the goddess. And it also describes Devi Mahatmya and Devi Bhagavata also describes Mahishasura using his powers to change into different forms. The form of a man, he takes up the form of a man, he takes up the form of a lion, an elephant, a buffalo, a sharaba, etc. And these have been instances have been visualized as part of the narrative sculptures in Kerala. So the depiction of Mahishasura as part of the narrative sculptures of Kerala are seen in three different forms. Either he is depicted in his anthropomorphic form as a man and wholly, or he is shown in a zoanthropomorphic form as shown here, or he is shown as a zoomorphic form, which includes two different styles of depiction. Either he is shown as an elephant form or he is shown in a buffalo form. We'll look into that in the coming slides. So you can see this is a wonderful and exquisite depiction of Mahishasura Yuddha as part of the bracket figures of the Sri Payyanur Subramanya Swami temple in Kerala. You can see how an important feature, as I was talking about, an important feature of the depiction of Rakshasas and Asuras is the possession and the mastery and the skillful mastery over Maya, in which they have the ability to shape shift, that is to take on different shapes. And this transmogrification of the Asura is depicted here. This characteristic feature of Asura is depicted here in the bracket figures as part of the narrative sculptures. As you can see, Mahishasura starts off the Yuddha in his zoanthropomorphic form or a stereomorphic form, in which he is shown as a half buffalo and a half man. Then he later takes up the form of a man, which is depicted in the fully anthropomorphic form here. Then as the war progresses and as he gets hit by the goddess's army, he takes upon the form of an elephant and tries to attack the lion, that is the Vahana of Devi. In turn, Devi attacks the elephant, and then he takes up the form of a huge, monstrously built buffalo who picks up mountains on his horns and hurls them towards the goddesses. So you can again see that characteristic feature of a Rakshasa or Asura being shown in his buffalo form. He is shown as hugely and monstrously built and extremely powerful. And the manner in which the buffalo is portrayed here sort of reminiscences us with a sense of readiness to charge and attack someone. These are other depictions of Mahishasura as part of the bracket figures from another temple, Ponmeri temple, which is situated in Kerala. And as you can see here, again, the transmogrification of Mahishasura and his mastery over Maya is depicted here. As he starts off in a zoanthropomorphic form, he converts into a zoomorphic form and finally gets decapitated by the goddesses. So Mahishasura, as you can see here, is depicted in this zoanthropomorphic form with a wide variety of embellishments and ornaments. As we had seen earlier, the laterally expanded Kirida Maguda, the haras, kanganas, keyuras, bujavalayams. And it is also interesting to note that his lower garment stretches up to his ankle and is depicted beautifully pleated, a girdle and a sash, tassel and loop runs across his waist. So it again ascertains the fact that the royal status of the demon is being portrayed here in his zoanthropomorphic form. These narrative sculptures found in Kerala are found to be in conjunction with the story as vividly described in the Devi Mahatmya, as we seen earlier. So this is another representation from the Pudiyagavu temple in Kannur. You can see here that Mahishasura is initially depicted in his buffalo form or the zoomorphic form, then in a zoanthropomorphic form, and finally he is shown emerging out of a decapitated buffalo, while the goddess is shown puncturing the demon. To sum up, to analyze the sculptures of the depiction wherein Mahishasura is depicted, we can say that basically or broadly, Mahishasura depictions are divided into two broad divisions. Either he is depicted as part of the singular panel depictions, or he is depicted as part of the narrative sculptures. Within the singular panel, he is depicted as just as a severed head being stood upon by the goddess, or he is depicted in his frontal profile. And in the narrative sculptures, he is depicted in his anthropomorphic form, zoomorphic form, and the zoanthropomorphic form, of which the zoomorphic form includes the form of a buffalo and the form of an elephant. Now, moving on to the final concluding part of my presentation, I'd like to say that mythology is a predominant facet in understanding the development of an individual, the society, and the thought processes that are associated with it. Evil in myths and mythology are often manifested from the personification of unexplainable and uncontrollable phenomena and events in nature that impacts the humans at that particular time. These are then translated into sculptures. These demonic sculptures are a reflection of the features and elements that the society visualized as evil and demonic at that particular time. The sculptures in Kerala are predominantly executed in wood and are a visual rendition of the multitude of myth and literary texts that have influenced these sculptures. In the iconographic realm of Kerala, the myth seemingly played an important part. The myth of Mahishasura Mardini played an important part as several sculptures influenced by this particular legend are found depicted in temples across the state. The existence of sculptures in which the goddess stands upon the severed head of Asura, alongside the sculptures wherein the demon is killed when he rises out of a decapitated buffalo, seem to indicate the influence of both Tamil mythology and Sanskrit texts alike together. In several villages, especially in South India, we all know that buffalo is a sort of shown as a symbol of power. And hence, it might be assumed that the depiction of Mahishasura's head being trampled upon as per the Tamil mythology roughly denotes the absolute subdual of power by the goddess. It is also noted that several scholars like Christopher Fuller, James Lockfield, etc., has compared the transmogrification of the demon to a being who can change his outer form, but not his inner demonic goals. And Mahishasura is also said to represent the forces of evil, greed, and deceitful speech, hidden by his outer experiences. All these characteristic features which has been described here are seemingly imbibed within the portrayal of Mahishasura in the sculptures of Kerala, as we have just seen in the previous slides. It is also quite interesting to note that most of the narrative sculptures of Mahishasura Yuddham or wherein the Mahishasura is shown in a transmogrification state is clustered around the northern districts of Kannur and Kozhikode, that is the northernmost part of Kerala, while the singular images are mainly found towards the southernmost part of Kerala. This might probably pertain to the difference between the group of sculptors or the influence that has played upon the group of sculptors, but this particular point needs more elaboration and more studies to be ascertained. And I hope in the coming works I would be able to do, or anybody else would be able to do and justify this point. That concludes my presentation. I would like to thank Dr. Preeta ma'am for giving me a wonderful stage to present this, and the Department of Archaeology for providing me with the opportunity. And finally, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for spending their time listening to my presentation. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.